Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to science. All right, now we're going to talk about the stomach. We're going to talk about the cells involved and really the secretions and the enzymes that are going to be made. We're going to talk about the different parts of the stomach, and we're even going to get to the point of talking about heartburn and vomiting. All right, so the stomach is going to be a J shaped organ. As you can see, its shape here. And the shape of this is named in different parts. We're going to have the uppermost region, which is going to be called the cardia. And we're going to get into this area. This is going to be called the fundus of the stomach. As you move down, you're going to have interior linings, these different folds. These are going to be called rugae. The bottom of the stomach is going to be called the fundus. And this is going to be the body. So the cardia, fundus, body, pylorus. These are the different parts of the stomach. Also, we may notice the different kinds of muscles. So notice that the muscles of the stomach are not all going in one direction. You're going to have this big, long one going from end to end. This is going to be longitudinal. You're going to have some that are going to be going around the stomach. Those are the circular muscles. And you're going to have some that are going to be underneath this going downward, and that's going to be the oblique. All of these three are going to be involved in helping the massaging of the stomach, the contractions. That's going to help ultimately in the production of the breakdown of food by exposing more areas with surface area to volume, and so the enzymes can break down the food. So the stomach is going to receive the food at the very upper portion here at the cardia, and right as this esophagus is going to empty into, there's going to be a circular muscle called a sphincter. This is going to be called the cardiac sphincter. That's right there. It's not labeled here. This is called the lower esophageal sphincter. Its anatomical name is the cardiac sphincter. On the other end, there's the pyloric sphincter. But it's going to receive that food into the stomach. Once it gets into the stomach, you're going to have gastric juices that are going to start breaking it down. So those gastric juices are going to start the breakdown of different things. Like we have some fats that are going to be broken down here. We're going to have proteins that are going to be broken down here. But our chief thing that we're looking at is the breakdown of protein. So when the food has been broken down to its next stage, think of an assembly line. That this is kind of a heart of the assembly line where we're going to be going through a lot of different things, getting it ready for the next phase. But when it exits this area, it's now ready for that next phase. It has went through a lot of mechanical and chemical digestion. So if you look at the musculature of the stomach, it's going to be made up of smooth muscle, and we have circular muscles, and oblique, circular, longitudinal, and oblique muscles. Interior, we have the rugae and the different structures as the stomach empties through the cardiac sphincter into the cardia. This is the fundus, this uppermost part. The fundus is where you would find air because of just air rises. So if you swallowed air or something like that, that's where it would go. Here we have the body of the stomach, and then we have the gastric folds as we're identifying. This is lesser curvature, greater curvature, and we get to the pylorus there. So those are the parts of the stomach. So we're going to look at each part, kind of what they do, and then we're going to look at more of a microscopic side of things. So the cardia is going to be the uppermost region. This is going to contain the lower esophageal sphincter, which we identified as the cardiac sphincter. The fundus is going to be that rounded part that's going to be up towards the top in an area called the cardia. Now, if you look at where the cardia, this is really close in proximity to the heart. So the cardia, its name is kind of a convenience in us remembering where it is. So the fundus, for the most part, the food may go here, but it's temporary. Gravity is going to pull it down this way, and a lot of the liquids of the stomach are going to be here. Once again, a little bit of air may be here. And so this is temporary storage, if any. All right, the body. This is going to lie below the fundus and above the pylorus. So this is the body of the stomach. And the pylorus, this is going to be the distal portion closest to the small intestine. And so you're going to get the pylorus here. The pyloric sphincter is there. So the pylorus has the canal that's going to be leading towards the pyloric sphincter, and that's going to be called pyloric canal. And this is going to be the pyloric antrum. So this area there. All right. So, gastric secretions. The gastric secretions are going to be tied directly to this area. So, let's take a look at this first. We have parietal cells, we have chief cells. This is the enteroendocrine cells that are going to be lower down. And we're going to see a few different things that are going to be here. One is the chief cells, which you can see those vesicles that are within. This is going to make pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is going to be converted to pepsin, which is a digestive enzyme. But that digestive enzyme requires hydrochloric acid. We know that there's acid in our stomach, and so that acid has to come from somewhere. That's going to come from parietal cells. So parietal cells have a mechanism where they're going to make an acidic condition, and that acidic condition is going to convert the pepsinogen into pepsin. So we need pepsin to break down those proteins, so it's a nice complement system. We're also going to look at some columnar cells that are also involved that are going to be making the mucus and the mucus neck. So this area that we're looking at here, this is deep down in these folds. Once again, the folds create a lot of different increased amount of surface area as we look at the rouge of the stomach. So as you go down into this area, you have the gastric gland that's going to be here, and the mucus neck. This mucus neck is going to uh, produce an alkaline type solution to protect the stomach lining. So let's take a look at these different things from a different standpoint of the audible standpoint. So pepsinogen, inactive form of pepsin. This is pre-useful, and it is secreted by chief cells. Pepsin is going to be, when activated by hydrochloric acid, it's going to break proteins down into polypeptides. Once again, a polypeptide is going to be less than 100 amino acid. A protein is bigger than 100 amino acids, and so we're chopping this big structure into smaller structures. We're going to look at different kinds of proteases that are going to be involved later in the digestive tract and the small intestine that's going to be involved in the breakdown of these polypeptides. But this is breaking it to smaller pieces so it can actually be useful. All right, gastric lipase is going to break down fats. It's a fat splitting enzyme. Think of a typical triglyceride, which will have a glycerol and 30 fatty acids. We're going to have the cleaving of those different fatty acid chains from this by using gastric lipase. There's different lipases that we're going to see along the way that's going to break that up further into smaller components. Hydrochloric acid is made by the parietal cells, and we saw those parietal cells here. Once again, hydrochloric acid producing cells. Here's the pepsinogen producing cells of the chief cells. Mucus is a protective lining. It lubricates and keeps the stomach from digesting the stomach. All right, some intrinsic factors not mentioned yet. This is going to be useful in the absorption of B12. Without this, we don't get B12, and we lead to other kinds of long-term suffering and disease. All right, so after we look, let's just overview where we were. Rouge, gastric pits within, and as we move down here, goblet cells and the columnar epithelial, we get down into this enteroendocrine. We have the chief cells, we have the parietal cells, all of these doing different things. The mucosal neck, which is really releasing that mucosa to protect the overall stomach. So gastric juice is going to be continually made. Now, how often it's going to be its continuous nature is, let me say this differently. It's going to be continually made, but the amount may change. That's the best way to say it. Controlling the amount, that's going to be neural and hormonal. All right, so the neural component. We've talked about a few times, sympathetic being the fight or flight side of things, and we have the parasympathetic as being the rest and digest. Under parasympathetic innervation, we're going to have an increased amount of gastric activity. So what does this really mean? It's going to release histamine. This is going to stimulate gastric secretion. And now let's look at the hormones that are going to be involved in gastric secretion. So somatostatins are going to be one that when the somatostatins are involved, they're going to cause digestion to really slow down. They're going to do this by reducing the amount of hydrochloric acid that is made. Since we have low amounts of hydrochloric acid that's made, then we're not going to cause pepsinogen that's going to be converted to pepsin. If we don't have pepsin being made, we can't break down proteins into polypeptides. Gastrin, its name is kind of handy. It's going to increase the amount of gastric secretions So this is under direct parasympathetic control, which is really going to help the digestion in general. All right, CCK. This is going to be released in the small intestine. This is going to be a type of um, feedback that we're going to see, but it's going to help in the breakdown of protein and fat as it enters, and it's going to decrease gastric motility. So it's moving around, it's going to be under that control. So as impulses from the parasympathetic preganglionic nerve fighter or the vagus nerve, nerve 10 of um, the brainstem, you're going to see it come off and it's going to have its response here. Parasympathetic postganglionic impulses stimulate the release of gastric juices from the gastric glands. After that, gas impulses stimulate the release of gastrin in the bloodstream. That's going to cause the gastrin stimulates the release of more gastric juices. So we're going to see positive feedback here, and this is going to cause more and more of breakdown. When we look at the phases of gastric secretion, we have the cephalic, gastric, and intestinal phases. Cephalic is going to refer to head. Anytime you see the word cephalo, that's referring to the head. So this is going to involve the parts of digestion where your body sees, tastes, smells the food. Oftentimes, the enjoyment of eating food, other than satiation, is the cephalic phase where we're looking at something that just looks delicious, or we taste something or smell something. Like Burger King is just notorious for having that grill smell, like, oh, that smells so good. So that all helps start the process of gastric juices flowing, causing your body to start its process. You can think about your favorite food and you'll start salivating. The reason you're salivating, you're releasing salivary amylase, and that amylase is useful in breaking down starch. So you're preparing for the breakdown of starch just by thinking about the food digestion. The gastric phase, this is going to have the actual release of gastrin, where it's going to cause other gastric juices and reflexes to help in the secretion of gastric juices, which is going to cause more and more of this digestion. Once it gets to this point, went through and the creation of this chyme, it's then going to move into the intestinal phase, where you're going to have the walls of the intestines that's going to be absorbing these nutrients as it's moving through. So gastric absorption. So now we're looking at the gastric phase. So gastric has the enzyme pepsin. It's going to break down proteins, the walls of the stomach. That doesn't really do a lot of absorption. It absorbs a little bit, and this is what it can absorb: water, certain salts, certain lipid-soluble drugs, and alcohol. This is why when people drink, they're able to have an effect of the alcohol so fast. So the mixing of food with the stomach and gastric juices produces something that we're not calling the bolus anymore. It's definitely not called food anymore. This is going to be called chyme. We looked at peristalsis. Remember the alternating contractions that move something down? The small amount of chyme that is going to be transported through the pyloric sphincter by peristalsis, we're going to have a little bit move through at a time, and your body is going to use this peristaltic waves of the distal portion of the stomach to help push it back if it needs to, and that's going to keep mixing it, keep chemically breaking down. The lower esophagus is going to prevent backflow of chyme into the esophagus. This is what we call the cardiac sphincter. So the emptying rates depending on the amount of chyme and the type of food. When all is said and done, it's going to enter into the duodenum. I hear some people call it the duodenum potato. So the accessory glands are going to add secretions. We will look at those that are going to act on the chyme as that enters the small intestine. So when chyme starts to fill the duodenum, stretch receptors initiate the enterogastric reflex. This slows stomach emptying and intestinal filling. And so you don't want to just have massive amounts move into your duodenum because you have a massive amount in your stomach. Instead, you want to slowly empty it into that so digestion can actually work through. The quicker things are moving through your small intestine, the less time that you have to digest it. And so you want to slow that rate. And so enterogastric response is going to say, like, okay, wait, let's digest. All right, let's have some more. And so it has that continual process. So what is vomiting? Vomiting is going to be the emptying of the stomach. We are familiar with that. Certain drugs, certain toxins in your body. If your body swallows it, you immediately vomit. And Um, this is your body's response to different poisons. So whenever it sees that poison, it's like, we need to empty this content right now so we don't die. And so your body, once again, is kind of dramatic, and it's going to purge content, purge content. Evolution has supported why it's doing this, because those that were purging survived. Those that just didn't, because their body didn't, were probably receiving side effects, and maybe they were eliminated earlier, or maybe that poison got them. So our body is going to vomit because of motion sickness, body motion changes, and the motion sickness is tied to the semicircular canals, the otoliths that are in the ear, um, for your sense of balance. So the vomiting center is going to be tied to your medulla oblongata, just below your pons, just above your spinal cord. So to actually vomit, these things occur, and so this may mess with your vomiting. One is you take a deep breath. Ever notice you take a deep breath before you vomit it? You're going to raise your soft palate because you don't want the stuff flowing out your nose. Think of how often you vomited out your nose. Um, it really doesn't happen. Your glottis, the thing that's going to protect your nasal cavity. You're going to have the relaxation of your esophageal sphincter. You're going to have contraction of the diaphragm. This is going to be that sheet of muscle that's going to be underneath each rib, that diaphragm innervated by the phrenic nerve. And this is going to cause contraction of the abdominal walls and force food out the mouth. Really unpleasant. I don't recommend it. All right, so a common problem, heartburn. Heartburn is occurring when you have some of the digestive content, that chyme, that's moving instead of down to the pyloric sphincter, it's moving up through the cardiac sphincter. The lower esophageal sphincter is another name for that. So you can get something like a stomach ache. Now, the funness of the stomach is setting, where, if you look at where it's setting and then you start moving the esophagus is going to run just behind the heart. And so if you're having pain in this region, it's going to kind of feel like pain in the chest, angina, as you're looking at, um, you're going to, heartburn. It's going to be this burning feeling that's going to be right behind your heart. And it may think that you're having a cardiac event when really it's not the event at all. So there's an old adage, maybe a Yogi Bear quote. If you want to lose weight, stop eating 20 minutes before you get full. So it takes your body about 20 minutes to feel like it's full. So if you eat slowly, there's a better chance that you'll feel satiated sooner without having the overeating. If you eat fast, you can eat large amounts of food, and you would have been full way before you stopped eating, but you kept eating, and then you eventually are overly full. So excessive fullness leads to abdominal pain and gastric reflux. So gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD, you have the contents that are moving up and from the stomach up to your esophagus. So the way that you're going to neutralize an acid as it's moving into your esophagus is by taking an antacid. So that provides some relief. There's several different kinds on the market, everything from Tums to Prilosec. Um, so ways that you can prevent heartburn: eat small meals, eat slower. Um, After eating, stay upright, so digestion. And as a good rule of thumb, just with anything, avoid caffeine, avoid nicotine, avoid alcohol. So even though those things make you feel good on other ways, they are problematic for most of your body. So avoid those. All right, guys, we'll get into the small intestine next. I look forward to seeing you then. So long.